From the CISO series, it's Cybersecurity Headlines.
Ransomware accounts for a quarter of cyber insurance claims. Close to half of on-prem databases contain vulnerabilities, and 91% of IT teams have felt forced to trade security for business operations. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's Cybersecurity Headlines. And now we'll get a chance for some insight, opinion, and I guarantee some expertise on these stories and more from our guest, Jeff Belknap, the CISO at LinkedIn. Jeff, thank you so much for being on the show. It is an absolute pleasure. Of course, we want to thank our sponsor, Sunry Security, who is helping us bring the show to you today. We'll be talking a little bit more about them in just a moment. And remember, we are on Crowdcast. I can point right above me to the URL. If you're joining us live, you can get in on the conversation there. If you have some comments, we'll highlight them on the show. So check that out as well. We've got 20 minutes, though, so let's get it going. Our first story of the day: ransomware accounts for a quarter of cyber insurance claims. This comes from a new study from the insurance giant Marsh and looks at all cyber insurance claims from 2016 to 2020. So really the genesis of the whole ransomware ramp up here. Over that whole period, ransomware accounted for 25% of claims, but in 2020, that percentage rose to 32%. The thing that drives firms to insurance is often fear of ransomware, but ransomware is also a major factor driving up costs for insurers. We've seen insurers actually stop insuring ransomware for that very reason. A recent study by the Cyber Insurer Coalition found that this rise in costs is due to firms consistently choosing to pay ransoms and cover recovery costs through insurance while also deferring security upgrade costs. Jeff, looks like a vicious cycle here from both the insurer and the insuree situation. Who do you think will be the first adult in the room and say, maybe this isn't sustainable in any meaningful way?
I think, like most things, when it comes to money, the first person to blink is almost certainly going to be the insurers when they say, "Wait a minute, this isn't a good idea," and they will almost certainly start by changing their policies to make it much more challenging for them to pay out, like insurance companies are known for, but also because just the threat landscape has changed so much. But I think the real tell here is when we start to see legislative and regulatory action to prevent paying out for these things. And doesn't feel like that's very far off.
Yeah, we've already seen it in France where they've started this process kind of already to get ahead of that. I can't imagine that would be too far behind. Until that is, though, there will always be someone that's willing to say, hey, if you hand us a slightly smaller bundle of cash, we'll give you a larger bundle of cash in exchange for ransomware insurance. There's always going to be someone that plays ball, right?
There will be, but I think eventually what you're going to see, I mean, the big insurance companies are already figuring it out. They're paying money that's going to nefarious causes and use cases. And eventually we're going to find that the people that are doing that, the people that are still willing to do that, are probably not the greatest people that you want to be doing business with.
All right. Our second story here: hackers steal data from the United Nations. Bloomberg reports that the unidentified people behind the theft appear to have gained access simply by using login credentials stolen from a UN employee. It's been theorized that the username and password used in the cyber attack were purchased from a website on the dark web. Researchers found that the UN systems were first accessed by hackers on April 5th, 2021, and that network intrusion continued to take place until August 7th. So we're looking at a 4-month timeline here. So kind of two problems. One, obviously, being in your system for 4 months, not great. But the fact that, IDs are bought in the dark web seem to suggest that maybe there weren't adequate security controls for, password changing for UN employees or the UN in general.
That's right. I think that's the right way to start thinking about this. But the two ways that I would break it out are, one of the things that's relatively new to people that aren't dealing with this every day is there is now an entire sort of economic ecosystem out there for people that are executing ransomware plots or other criminal acts, where they can just buy credentials to be reused as the foothold to get in the door. Phishing still works, but you don't even have to go that far to have a phishing a campaign anymore. You just go buy credentials for whatever your target is. The second half of it is, hey, that thing that we've all been saying for almost a decade now of add 2FA to everything that you're doing, it really is time to do it. It's cheap, it's easy, it's not high friction for your users, and generally it makes this kind of practice much harder for somebody to use.
Yeah, I think we need a "Have I been pwned" for the UN. It seems like, but I mean
Yeah.
the 4 month here. I mean, is this something where the UN has particular issue where it's like you can't just geofence and say, oh, someone's logging in from another country? That doesn't exactly work when it's the UN necessarily, right?
Yeah, I think I'm sure there are a bunch of things like that in play here, and we don't know the specifics. When somebody's in your environment for 4 months based on a stolen credential, that's a little embarrassing. But the reality is, who knows what the specifics of it were. I think the real thing to focus on is how do you make this much harder to happen, and maybe the UN needs to spend a little more time thinking about their detection strategy.
Add the security speed bumps indeed. 91% of IT teams have felt forced to trade security for business operations. That's our next headline here. According to a study released on Thursday by HP Wolf Security, the teams felt pressured to compromise security due to the need for business continuity during the pandemic, especially in regard to employees who work from home. Kind of a familiar refrain that we've definitely seen here. 76% of respondents said that the security had taken a back seat. And furthermore, 83% believed that working from home was creating a ticking time bomb for corporate security incidents. No hyperbole there. It also appears that there are general feelings of apathy and frustration when it comes to managing cybersecurity in a remote workplace, and that younger workers in particular are more likely to circumvent existing security controls in order to manage their workloads, with 48% of this group saying that security tools such as website restrictions or VPN requirements are a hindrance, and 31% have at least attempted a bypass. There's a lot to unpack here, Jeff. Maybe the most surprising here is that I would have guessed if you had told me, hey, there's a certain age group of employees that are going to try and get around this. I would have thought it might have been your more senior people that are more familiar, like I know the best way to do it. What stands out to you from this?
Well, I think the first thing that stands out to me is like a your job as a security professional is always to be balancing security for the business, right? So in the midst of a pandemic, yeah, you're going to have to trade off some amount of security, or depending on how stringent your security was, in order to enable people to work remotely. But the other thing, and the thing that really comes out across in this story, especially when you start talking about age groups, is that younger workers are always going to be more sensitive to what that user experience is like. They're going to be focused on how do I get my job done with the least amount of friction and road bumps in the way. And they're always going to be focused on getting their job done over sort of performatively going through some of the this dogmatic security theater. So if this is you, if you read this story and this describes your environment, what you really need to ask is like, is the security team optimizing for user experience or optimizing for perfect security? Because if you optimize for perfect security, you're going to end up in an environment where you're incentivizing people to bypass your security controls. You always have to be optimizing for how do we get the business moving forward? How do we inject as few controls as possible to make that work?
All right, our next story here, SSID stripping is a new take on spoofing. This newly discovered vulnerability impacts devices, basically running all your run-of-the-mill OSs these days. Researchers showed how malicious actors could alter SSIDs to make them appear to be legitimate networks. One approach used a null byte in a name or a non-printable character that served to erroneously display SSIDs. It just all depends on the platform how those render. While most operating systems have protections against spoofed SSIDs, SSID stripping can cause the network's display to be legitimate, or at least appear to be so, prompting users to then manually connect. Lots of it's impossible to kind of see where the next threat surface or something like that is going to come from. But on the spectrum of ticking time bomb hyperbole that we've talked about, and okay, where does this fall, I guess, in that gap?
I feel like this is one of those things that really is, this could be part of a broader attack. I don't know that people need to rush out and worry about this thing specifically. There's certainly some stuff we've already talked about and some stuff that we're going to talk about later that's probably a higher priority. But this is the beginning of what could be a sophisticated attack. People can trick you into logging into a fake Wi-Fi network. Now, you still have to type in your credentials. You still might get alerted whether there's certificate errors. So it's not like you're going to get on the Wi-Fi network and immediately be attacked. But we've all known, all practitioners have known for a while, that there's lots of fake Wi-Fi shenanigans that are going on out there. And thankfully, there are a lot of other defenses against it. So not the highest priority thing you have to worry about, but really interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, and hopefully the OS makers can take that and another thing to fix, eliminate that as a possibility in a future
That's
release for
right.
sure.
Indeed.
All right, and now we want to take a time to thank our sponsor for today, Sunry Security. Are you a security expert who's afraid to admit you don't know what the heck is going on in your cloud? Relax. Public cloud security is overwhelming. Figuring out where to start and what to do to track and improve your security posture is the first step. Sunry tracks everything in your cloud, sensitive data, identities, and platform configuration, and tells you what issues are most important. Plus, it measures improvement over time. You can connect with Sunry Security at sunry.com to learn more. All right, our next story here, industrial control systems hammered by cyber attacks. According to new data from Kaspersky, 33.8% of industrial control systems, or ICS, that were monitored by Kaspersky were targeted by a cyber attack in the first half of 2021. Doesn't mean they got through, they were just targeted. Internet-based threats were the leading vector with 18.2% of attempts, with removable media accounting for 5.2%, followed by email attachments, always persistent, with 3%. Although this is a smaller rise than we've seen with IoT, which saw a doubling of attacks in a recent study we covered last week, I believe, the number of unpatched or unsecured systems exposed to the public-facing internet is troubling, with the number of ICS vulnerabilities reportedly up 41% in the first half of the year. So the number of things that you can attack have grown, even if the number of attacks perhaps haven't grown as dramatically. So Jeff, ICS doesn't really get into the public eye all that much. We've occasionally heard something about a SCADA system or something like that running on a floppy drive. Is this something that maybe the U.S. government should be overseeing and enforce more forcefully as part of broader infrastructure initiatives? We're seeing a lot of legislation seemingly about to be passed with that. Should these kind of protections be tied into that?
Probably. I feel like, and we were talking this a little bit about this before the show. If we fast forwarded the show 5 years into the future, I feel like this would still be a story that would be on the headlines in any given week. And the reality is, the boring problems are often the ones that get solved the last. And this is definitely one of those things where seems really boring and unsexy right until it gets compromised and causes a huge problem. So would really like to see more attention on these kind of things and really overhauling what ICS systems we're focused on solving in the first place. But this is one of those cases where there's a lot. This is infrastructure. There's a lot of this stuff out there, and it's expensive to go replace. So would love to see more action here, either from a regulatory perspective or really just from a government works project.
All right, next up here, close to half of on-prem databases contain vulnerabilities with many critical flaws. Close to half of on-premises servers contain vulnerabilities that may be ripe for exploitation. This comes from an Imperva study released this week, which analyzed 27,000 databases and their security posture. In total, 46% of on-premises databases worldwide, accounted in the scan, contain known vulnerabilities. On average, each database contained 26 security flaws, with 56% of those ranked as high or critical severity. Based on Imperva scans, some CVEs have gone unaddressed for 3 or more years, indicating a lot of this is just not doing routine patching. So, Jeff, this connects a little bit from a lot of our previous stories that we've been talking about and consistently kind of come up on the show. What will it take for senior management to kind of take these under-the-hood vulnerabilities more seriously, or is that missing kind of the issue here?
No, I think first of all, you could probably easily retitle this headline to "All on-premises systems have unpatched vulnerabilities." It is a age-old problem of trying to get the right balance of attention on fixing these things, but also keeping the business working. A lot of these systems, especially the older systems, were built with the thought that once they're in, they're good, right? You buy a car and it's good until it's not anymore. Most people don't think about critical infrastructure in their environment as needing to be upgraded every month, every 5 days, or anything regularly than whatever the useful lifetime of that equipment is. So this is yet again another reminder, and it's really smoke before you really see the significant fire, that if you can stay on top of patching these things, you can stay ahead of things like ransomware or ICS problems or any of the other things that we've talked about. But if you don't, this is the thing you need to focus on to avoid potential ransomware attacks or anything else that might be damaging for your business. And, I don't know, I'm just going to keep screaming it from the rooftops, like, please focus on patching and please focus on deploying SSO and 2FA. It's the easiest thing you can do to protect your business.
Is this a generational problem where, kind of like you brought up with a car, where you buy it and you don't update it? Well, when you have a Tesla or, a modern electric car, you're going to get over-the-air updates, and that's something I think we're increasingly have to get used to. Is this and perhaps, and there's a generational gap of expectation there. Is that the same thing we're seeing where the DBA and the storage graybeard or something like that? Don't touch my storage, don't touch my database. Is this something that gets sorted out as it just becomes like this is the received wisdom as opposed to someone that's done this for 30 years?
I don't think it's quite so easy. I'm sure that has some factor to play in this, but I think the reality is a lot of these systems, especially if we're talking about on-prem database systems, like these are not things that were built in the last 3 to 5 years. They were things that were built much before then. And when they were architected, whether the database is part of a broader system or just the database itself, it wasn't really envisioned to be patching very frequently, so that in a way that would reduce downtime or impact to whatever the critical business system that it feeds. And because of that, it's really hard to take that down. If you're a bank or some sort of mission critical service provider, and you have to take your entire mainframe or your core database down to patch it, well, that's a significant event that you have to schedule ahead of time. Most of these databases are not like your iPhone and Android device where it'll just patch while you're asleep, or it'll take 5 minutes and patch in the middle of the day or while you're in a meeting. We need technology to catch up so that things are much easier to patch, so that you're reducing the barrier to that.
All right, next up here, Apple issues urgent updates to fix new near zero day linked to Pegasus spyware. Apple released emergency security updates early this week after it was discovered that an Israeli cyber surveillance company's spyware could infect iPhones and other devices without the owner even clicking on a link. One of the vulnerabilities defeated extra security protections built into the operating system. This is connected to the forced entry, which was weaponized by Israeli surveillance vendor NSO Group. The iPhone, iPad, Mac, and Apple Watch users are advised to immediately update their software. So, Jeff, we're not just looking at potential political targets here, which we've kind of been talking about with NSO Group here. What do we think this means for the public and for Apple as a brand, which is, very much staked its flag into the privacy and security bona fides?
Well, let's take a minute and reflect on the thing that really worked out well here. Apple's able to release patches, and you're able to have them and update your devices fast and easy, and you're able to get that done without much disruption to your life. The downside, though, is what this means is what everybody has worried about is as exploits get cheaper, and certainly as there are people that operate in the legal gray area to sell these and to market them to various different users of those things, it's going to get harder and harder to make sure that those things are only used for valid use cases of attacking national security interest targets. In this case, if you're be kind about what I say here, if you lose your way, and there always is going to be somebody that loses their way when there's a commercial interest at stake, a lot of people can get impacted. So the hardest part for me is it's already hard enough to play the job of defense, right? I have to be right all the time. The bad guys have to be right only once, right? And then they can find a way in. If we allow people to be commercially incented to go sell these exploits for various use cases, this is a problem that makes my life harder, and that it just makes everybody less secure. So while I very much wish that we could ban this and outright exclude it, I think it really just means that we're going to have to continuously build technology that builds trust, safety, privacy, security into everything that we do, because there's always going to be this kind of threat out there.
Before we move on to our next story, James G had an interesting comment regarding ICS and IoT systems, kind of two things we've been talking about the last 2 weeks here. He's saying they should have be subject to the same governance as IT. Does, obviously there's a larger conversation to be had here. Does, in the broad sense, does that scan to you, Jeff?
Yeah, although I'd say, maybe I don't understand the comment completely. IT really has very few regulation, right? I think the fact that IT in general or operational IT systems can patch faster, not so much about regulatory requirements. So we definitely should be looking at ICS to patch and act as operationally fast as other IT systems. But I think we're really going to have to require that infrastructure as it's built or as it's overhauled, or especially if we give people a tax break or some other economic incentive, that you need to fix these issues that are very easy to underlying problems for all of us, because we all rely on systems that ICS supports.
All right, and finishing up here, misconfigured APIs account for 2/3 of cloud breaches. According to an IBM report, over half of breaches last year resulted from shadow IT systems being spun up without being subject to corporate security controls, such as vulnerability and risk assessment and hardened security protocols. basically being shadow IT. Additionally, 2/3 of the incidents studied involved improperly configured APIs, which could result in either threat actors accessing data due to deficient authentication controls or sensitive data leaks due to APIs being granted excessive permissions. The report also highlights that threat actors often jump from on-premises to cloud environments, highlighting that businesses need to manage their distributed infrastructure as a single environment. Ooh, a lot to unpack here, but I mean, is that the key here? Do we need to have like this holistic view, and as opposed to kind of this this on-prem and kind of separate cloud worlds here?
We do. We need to stop seeing them be separate. And then if there's anything that we've learned, those of us that are building these systems that often have APIs, it's that we really have to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, it's time to A, stop charging extra for security, and B, really put our best foot forward and make sure that as we're shipping that API, we're shipping it in a secure way first. And that while we can always give people the ability to tune and adjust things the way that they'd like, that we let them adjust it to be insecure, not to adjust it to be secure. And I think that will make a big difference in the way that a lot of these things play out. Because today, a lot of the problems we're seeing are you have to go manually fob that toggle and make it be secure, when really it should start the other way around.
All right. One person that frobbed my toggle was you, Jeff. Thank you so much for being on the show today. Awesome insights. Really appreciate your time. Where can people find you if they are so inclined?
There's this little website called LinkedIn. I think that's a great way to find me. And if I'm not on LinkedIn and you're looking for less professional humor, I'm also available on Twitter. Or you can just call Steve or Rich's cell phone directly and ask me.
Yes, of course. I will forward you on right away. Jeff Belknap, CISO of LinkedIn, thank you once again. We, of course, want to thank our sponsor, Sunry Security. Thank you so much for helping us make this show possible. Remember, you can get cybersecurity headlines every day in about 6 minutes. You don't just need to get caught up here. You can catch us every single day. Come on back next week for our Friday video chats. We've got live video content coming to you all day on Friday. Our Friday CISO series video chat will be hacking threat intelligence, an hour of critical thinking about what to trust in order to take necessary action. Starts at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, and then we'll be followed by speed dating. And then we're going to have the weekend review, 12:30 p.m. Pacific, 3:30 p.m. Eastern. You already know about it because you're listening to this right now, but you should definitely check it out. Join us live if you can. Get all the details at CISOseries.com. Until then, I'm Rich Straffolino telling you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOseries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.